A crowd stood in silence as the auction began, but no one expected what happened next. A woman with a sack tied tightly over her head was dragged onto the stage like she wasn't even human, her hands trembling, her clothes torn, and her eyes hidden beneath the cloth, yet no one dared to bid, not even a single dollar, until one voice broke through the hush. $2, said a quiet, lonely man from the back of the crowd, a lumberjack with empty eyes and a heart that had forgotten how to hope. And just like that, she was his, no questions asked, no name revealed, no past uncovered. But what happened next was something no one could have imagined, because the moment she stepped into his cabin and spoke her name for the first time, he dropped to his knees, frozen, trembling, breathless, because he had heard that name before. From a woman he lost 10 years ago in a fire, Jack lived far away from the noise of the world, deep inside a forgotten forest where no one visited and no one cared who lived or died. And in that lonely silence stood a small wooden cabin built by his own hands, cold, empty, and lifeless, just like his heart. Every morning he chopped wood. Every night he sat by the fire staring at shadows that never spoke back. He once had dreams, once knew love, but time had taken everything from him. Friends, family, laughter, all gone like smoke in the wind. He never smiled, never waited for anyone, because no one ever came. But deep inside, a soft voice still whispered for a second chance, a companion, a reason to breathe again. He didn't ask for much, just someone who would sit beside him, speak his name, and make the silence feel a little less painful. He had no idea she was on her way, until one cold evening changed everything. Jack had no reason to leave his cabin, but that day, something in the wind whispered differently, pulling him toward the nearby village market, a place he hadn't visited in years. As he walked down the muddy path with nothing but his old coat and heavy boots, he felt something shift inside him, like fate had finally decided to speak. The village was alive with murmurs and firelight, but what caught his attention wasn't the noise or the stalls, it was the gathering near the old auction house. Curious, Jack stepped closer and saw people standing in a tight circle, whispering and laughing, their faces lit by torches as a rough wooden platform creaked under a figure standing alone. It was a woman, silent, still, and covered from head to toe in ragged clothes, her face completely hidden under a sack tied with rough twine. Her hands were bound gently in front, not in force, but in shame. No one dared to speak to her. They mocked her, laughed at her presence, like she was less than human, a joke to be bought and forgotten. The auctioneer shouted, "Start the bidding." But not a single hand rose. One man jeered, "I wouldn't pay a penny." Another added, "She might be cursed." The laughter grew louder, but she never moved, never cried, never even looked up. Jack stared at her. Something inside him stirred, something old and buried deep. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was a quiet recognition, like a soul calling to another. Before he could even think, his hand lifted slowly into the cold night air. $2, he said. The crowd went silent, eyes turned toward him in shock. The auctioneer froze for a moment, then smiled strangely and slammed his hand on the podium. "Sold." The crowd burst into murmurs and disbelief. Some laughed, some shook their heads. But Jack didn't care. He didn't know why he did it, or what he was bringing home, but his heart told him it was right. The woman didn't speak. She simply followed him, her head lowered, sack still hiding her face. On the way back through the forest, Jack didn't ask her name, didn't question her silence. He gave her his coat, and she didn't refuse. When they reached his cabin, he lit a small fire and offered her the only chair he had. She sat quietly, still saying nothing. Jack looked at her for a long moment, then turned away, giving her space. He didn't know her past. He didn't need to. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. Something had changed. He had no idea who she was, but deep inside, something told him this was not the first time their souls had met, and whatever her story was, it was just beginning. The cabin was still, but no longer cold, and though she didn't speak, her presence filled the silence like soft music in a forgotten place. Jack never asked her who she was or why she stood alone on that auction stage. With a sack over her head, he gave her space, warmth, food, and most importantly respect. The first night, she sat quietly near the fire, hands folded, eyes hidden. She didn't eat much, didn't lift the sack, and didn't ask for anything. Jack placed a blanket near the corner, pointed at it without saying a word, and she slowly walked over and lay down. He watched from his chair for hours, wondering who she was and what life had done to her to make her so silent. The next few days passed in quiet routine. Jack worked outside, chopping wood and carrying water. She cleaned the dishes, folded the blanket, and made tea without a sound. There were no smiles, but no fear either, just quiet understanding. On the third night, he left fresh bread on the table. She nodded slightly. On the fourth, he found his tools sharpened, though he hadn't asked. By the fifth, he noticed she placed a second chair near the fire, beside his. They never spoke, yet something invisible grew between them, trust. And then came the seventh night. Rain tapped against the wooden roof, and the fire cracked softly. Jack was sitting with his hands wrapped around a warm cup, staring at the flames, lost in thought, when he heard a voice, soft, trembling, and real. "Do you want to know my name for a second?" He thought he imagined it, but he turned slowly, and she was standing there still, calm, her hands shaking just a little. He nodded gently. The room felt frozen, as if even time had stopped to listen. She raised her hands to the rope tied under her chin, fingers hesitating, then slowly began to untie it. Her breath grew uneven, and Jack could feel her fear. Whatever was under that sack was more than just a face. It was a story, a wound, a secret she'd carried for far too long. The cloth slipped off, falling to the floor like a whisper. Her hair was tangled. Her face was pale, marked with faded bruises, lips cracked, but her eyes were alive, glowing with pain, strength, and something else, recognition. Jack stared at her, unable to speak. She looked directly into his eyes and said softly, "My name is Anna." The cup fell from his hands and shattered. His heart stopped. That name, that voice, that face, it was impossible. Anna had died 10 years ago in a house fire, or so he thought. He stood slowly, breathless, hands trembling, staring at the woman he once buried in his memory. And now, somehow, she stood before him, real, broken, and returned. Jack couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. The name hit him like a storm that had been waiting for 10 long years. "Anna," he whispered, his voice dry, eyes wide with disbelief, heart pounding in his chest like it wanted to escape. She nodded once, slowly, her lips trembling as tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, it's me," she said, her voice soft, fragile, and filled with weight. Jack took a step back, almost stumbling. His mind raced through memories he thought he had buried, flashes of laughter, of warm coffee on cold mornings, of Anna dancing barefoot in their old kitchen, of the fire that took everything from him, the night his life ended and the silence began. He had cried over ashes, dug through ruins with bloodied hands, and buried what was left of her scarf. He had lived with the belief that she had burned, lost to flames he couldn't fight, and now she was standing right in front of him, alive, scarred, but breathing. His voice cracked. How is this possible?" Anna looked away for a moment, then met his eyes again, pain flooding her face. "I never died, Jack. I was taken. That night, someone set the house on fire from outside. I tried to escape, but someone grabbed me. I screamed your name, but you were already passed out from the smoke. They dragged me away. I thought you were dead. They kept me locked for years, moved me from place to place. I lost hope until one day they left me alone long enough to run." Jack felt dizzy, gripping the side of the chair to stay upright. He looked at her face, different, older, hurt, but the eyes were hers, still Anna, still the woman he loved beyond words. His hands trembled as he reached out, not to touch her, but to make sure she was real. She didn't flinch. She didn't step back. Instead, she placed her hand over his, gently, like she used to in the old days. "I didn't know if I'd ever see you again," she whispered. "They brought me to the village when they put me on that stage. I didn't care who took me. I just wanted the pain to end. But then, I heard your voice." Jack fell to his knees, tears filling his eyes, heart splitting open after years of being numb. "Anna, I thought I lost you forever." She knelt beside him, wiping his tears. "You didn't. You found me again." And in that moment, nothing else mattered, not the lost years, not the scars, not the fire. Because love had survived, even when hope hadn't. She had come back, not by chance, but by fate. That night, as the storm whispered against the windows, and the fire glowed softly between them, Jack lit a single candle and placed it on the table, the same table where Silence once sat. He looked into her eyes, the same eyes he had dreamed of for 10 long years, then slowly knelt on one knee and held out a simple ring he had carved from wood. "Not because I bought you," he said, voice shaking, "but because I never stopped loving you." Anna's eyes filled again, but this time with peace, not pain.